the Iroquois expansion by compression project is, as Bill says, it's another thing on the Iroquois pipeline. I have to kind of get down to where I can see my thing. Well, I know it well enough. Anyway, so it's another whack-a-mole. It's actually and the Dover compressor station, which is less than a mile away, is one of the 4 compressor stations that's being impacted. Next slide, please. So you can see here, down towards the bottom of the slide, you'll see Cricket Valley Energy. The blue line is the road. It says it's 1.5 miles. It's actually probably 3/4 of a mile from the 2. You can see, and they're going to increase the compressor station where the pin is from 18,000 horsepower to 30,000 horsepower. That's huge. And you can see how close the schools are that Bill mentioned. Next slide, please. So you can see, here's where the compressor station is, where the pin is. You can see parts of the Great Swamp, the wetlands, and you can see the school even closer. And that little green line that's running right next to the compressor station, that's a railroad. That's a train tracks, not safe. Next slide, please. So the Iroquois gas transmission, besides Dover, which is going to 30,000, they're going to increase Athens from 10 to 22,000, and the Brookfield from 18,000 to 42,000. That's huge. And the thing with the Brookfield, next slide, is that it's connected to the Algonquin gas transmission line, which is the line that runs underneath Indian Point, and I think you're going to hear about that later. It's just insane. Iroquois told me, well, they might be using the gas from Algonquin for this too. It's just insane. Next slide, please. So here's a simpler map of the 4 compressor stations that are involved. The Milford will just be for cooling. Next slide, please. So Iroquois has this pretty benefits page. Next slide, please. But I like to do things in black and white, the pros and the cons. Iroquois says greater supply will alleviate need for gas moratoriums. Cuomo forced National Grid and Con Ed to find other options when the 2 utilities threatened people with basically shutting off their heat due to the stopping of the Williams pipelines. National Grid was actually fined $36 million, woohoo, for the false threat. Iroquois is part of option B, which includes bomb train trucks. We push for the renewable option A for the 2 companies. Iroquois facilitates conversion from oil to gas heat. Well, that's passe. Utility companies are already stopping the promotion of conversions to natural gas for heat and stoves, and instead is pushing for heat pumps and electrical appliances. NYSEG rate case stressed this, good for them. As Bill said, natural gas is actually over 86 times as bad as CO2 over 20 years. We won't have 20 years if they don't stop this. Iroquois supports the intermittency of renewable energy sources. Well, that's a con, because this would indicate that this expansion would be used to supply energy sources. Iroquois does supply Cricket Valley, but that's not supposed to be part of this project. It is purportedly to be used just for heat and gas appliances. National Grid and Con Ed are the only clients. Next slide, please. So further cons, additional capacity with no new pipeline. The Iroquois pipeline is over 30 years old. Increasing capacity would increase pipeline leakage and potential for breaches and wars, including explosions. The next point is basically a lie, reduction in life cycle greenhouse gases. Increasing gas, regardless of any measures to reduce emissions at the source, will increase greenhouse gas emissions. Gas increased is greenhouse gas emissions increased. The pipelines will leak, the compressor stations will leak, the properties using the gas will leak, and it will all increase greenhouse gas emissions, creating more climate chaos. Oh, here we go. Iroquois, increase property taxes for host communities. This is the pay to pollute and poison the people mantra. The tax increase would actually be minimal, as Iroquois is already paying taxes because they already own these properties. Construction jobs and boost to local economy during construction. as Bill said, typical boom and bust language. Workers will likely be from out of state. The boost to Athens anyway, which is where I live close to, will be very small as there's no short-term housing and very few residents. Health impacts and dangers negate any possible benefits. Next slide, please. I'll be talking mostly about Athens, but the dangers and health of compressor stations are really well documented, and all pipeline infrastructure, including compressor stations, is an accident waiting to happen. Over the past 5 years, the U.S. has experienced one major compressor station or pipeline explosion every year. And in our opinion, the routine emissions surrounding the operation of natural gas compressor stations increases the risk for most major categories of human disease in the state, but especially in the communities where they are sited. That's from Doctors Russo and Carpenter from the Institute of Health. Next slide, please. Larissa Dirkstra has shared with me a slide that she used in a recent presentation, which lists all the diseases that are caused from the toxicants of people living near the compressor stations. Next slide, please. And this is an aerial view of where the Athens compressor station is, where you can see the pin. And you can see going up to the right and up, you'll see this little industrial center. And down below, you'll see the Athens generating plant and a power plant further down towards the bottom of the page that is actually owned by National Grid. Also, there's a little central Hudson pipeline. If you go to the next slide, I can talk about some of this infrastructure. Central Hudson has their power line running right there, right next to the train tracks, which is right next to the compressor station. And to the right of that is the Peckham Parco bituminous asphalt melting plant. You can see the huge pipelines for gas there, also right next to a train tracks, and that's right next to AmeriGas. And you can see the little gas line, those little yellow poles. That's a gas flaring section, which is also very reassuring for me. And you can see where the AmeriGas sign is and the railroad crossing. And across the street from all this is a lumber treatment plant where they have, huge kilns run from natural gas and also chemical facilities. And in the middle is National Grid's power plant. Next slide, please. But what scares me most about this infrastructure is up here on the top of the page, you can see part of the compressor station as it is now. You'll see that gray line running down the side. That's railroad tracks. Bomb trains run on those, the infamous bomb trains that carry crude oil. And right next to that, you see that bright green little pipeline easement, and that's the Central Hudson supply line. And coming up to the side, that curved green line, that's the Iroquois pipeline. You can see where it has connections, and the connection that's running down from it goes right to Athens Gen, which is maybe another 1,200 feet away. But at the bottom of the page, notice the central line, the bomb train line, and the Iroquois pipeline all join right there, and that is less than 800 feet from the compressor station. If they increase compression in this plant, the chances of explosion are much greater, and with all this infrastructure, it terrifies me. Next slide, please. There's also the freshwater wetlands. Lots of wetlands around here. Next slide, please. We're worried about the wetlands. We care about the wetlands. All the critters is bog turtles and short-eared bats and great northern harriers. Next slide, please. Comments to FERC. During April 3rd, a friend of mine got a letter. She lives really close to this, and she's an activist, Carrie Gardner. And she let me know. She said, I got a letter from FERC saying that scoping comments is starting. I'm like, well, how are we supposed to find that? I talked to FERC. They said, well, we post them in the libraries and in the community centers. Well, guess what, folks? This was during COVID. We were in shutdown. All the libraries, all the community buildings were closed. Nobody would have known this if it weren't for the fact that Carrie had let us know, and we let the word out. So the scoping comments did get out, and half of them were to FERC to ask them to please extend it, because so many people hadn't heard in time to research, but you know, there was no extension. The environmental assessment is due September 30th. So we'll see if they allow us to make any kind of comments after that, or if there's going to be an environmental impact statement. I'll let folks know. Next slide, please. So here we go. If you look just above the X and then no Iroquois EXC sign, that's the little white roof is the compressor station. Right beyond that is Athens Gen. These are 4 brave Athenians who are fighting this really seriously conservative frack me now, please community. Carrie and Chris and Donald and Nora, thank them very much. Next slide. And also I'd like to thank several, there's no other slide, sorry, go back please. There's no other slide, but I'd like to thank a whole lot of people.